The NFL preseason got off to a slow start, but the regular season opened fast for a highly regarded rookie runner. The top college football team extended their winning streak. The Major League season nears its end with 3 divisions still up for grabs, and much more in the August and September 1980 edition of Back in Time Sports. The NFL preseason got underway in the annual Hall of Fame game, with the San Diego Chargers facing the Green Bay Packers. The excitement for the start of the 1980 season was quickly dampened by both the play and the weather. The teams had combined for a total of only 166 yards of offense when the game was called off with 5 minutes and 29 seconds left in the fourth quarter, ending in a 0-0 tie. To make matters worse for Green Bay, their top 2 quarterbacks both left the game with injuries. According to the odds makers, there will be a repeat of last year's Super Bowl in New Orleans this year. The Pittsburgh Steelers, who were the first Super Bowl champion to visit the White House back in February, were the favorites to win their 3rd consecutive Super Bowl, just ahead of the Los Angeles Rams. The odds dropped considerably to the San Diego Chargers and Houston Oilers, both at 7-1. The NFC East should be a close battle this year, with Dallas, Washington, and Philadelphia all at 8-1 to win the Super Bowl. The long shots are the New York Giants at 500-1, the San Francisco 49ers at 750-1, and the Green Bay Packers at 1,000-1. For the last 2 years, the Houston Oilers have not only finished second to Pittsburgh in the AFC Central Division, but also lost to the Steelers in the AFC Championship game both years. During the offseason, Houston traded for former Oakland Raiders quarterback Ken Stabler, with hopes to break through this year. The Oilers will also lean heavily on last year's rushing champ Earl Campbell, who along with Walter Payton of the Chicago Bears is expected to compete for the rushing title again this year. The Oilers will know where they stand early in the season as they face the Steelers in Week 1. San Diego is pinning their hopes on the arm of Dan Fouts, who set an NFL record last year with 4,082 passing yards. He also led the league in completion percentage at 62.6 and ranked 3rd with a passer rating of 82.6, but also threw 24 interceptions. The NFC title may come down to which contender can make the best adjustment. The Los Angeles Rams are moving to a new home in Anaheim, the Dallas Cowboys are transitioning from quarterback Roger Staubach to Danny White, and Washington will be starting a new wide receiver in first-round pick Art Monk. Just a day before Week 1 of the NFL season kicked off, Miami head coach Don Shula signed a new 3-year contract extension with the team. With his old contract expiring after this season, there was speculation he may replace Tom Landry in Dallas or become Notre Dame's next coach. Shula has a record of 185 wins, 69 losses, and 5 ties, and has led Miami to 2 Super Bowl victories. His 185 wins are currently 3rd most all-time in the NFL, behind George Halas and Curly Lambeau. Miami had beaten their Week 1 opponent, the Buffalo Bills, in 20 straight games, but the streak came to an end as the Bills came out on top 17-7. The defending Super Bowl champion Pittsburgh Steelers got off to a good start, beating the Houston Oilers 31-17 in a rematch of last year's AFC Championship game. The Steelers held Earl Campbell to 57 yards rushing, but Campbell equaled his ground total through the air with his first pass in the NFL going for a touchdown. Quarterbacks in general were also off to a hot start, with Phil Simms throwing for 280 yards and 5 touchdowns, 4 of which went to Ernest Gray in the New York Giants' 41-35 win. Tommy Kramer threw for 395 yards and 3 touchdowns as he rallied the Minnesota Vikings past the Atlanta Falcons 24-23. Dan Fouts threw 4 touchdown passes as San Diego easily defeated Seattle 34-13. Steve Grogan and Ron Jaworski also threw for at least 275 yards and 3 touchdowns in winning efforts for their teams. Billy Sims, the number 1 pick in this year's draft, validated his selection as he was the leading rusher in Week 1 with 153 yards and 3 touchdowns to lead the Detroit Lions over last year's NFC champion Los Angeles Rams 41-20. A defensive struggle at Lambeau Field went to overtime with the Green Bay Packers and Chicago Bears tied 6-6. In a wild finish to the game, Packers kicker Chester Marcol attempted a 35-yard field goal in overtime, but the kick bounced off a Bears lineman and right back into Marcol's hands. Marcol took off around the left end and outraced 2 defenders to the end zone for the game-winning touchdown. On Monday night, Dallas Cowboy quarterback Danny White made a rough but successful debut, taking over for the retired Roger Staubach. White had 107 yards passing with 2 interceptions, but the Cowboys' running game and defense were enough to beat Washington 17-3. Week 2 saw a little less passing and a little more rushing as Billy Sims once again topped 100 yards and also caught an 87-yard touchdown. Rookie Ed Murray also kicked 5 field goals as Detroit beat Green Bay 29-7. Walter Payton led all rushers with 183 yards on only 18 carries as Chicago beat New Orleans 22-3. Payton became the 8th NFL player to rush for 7,000 yards in his career. Quarterbacks didn't disappear altogether, as Dan Fouts threw for 389 yards and 3 touchdowns in an overtime win over the Raiders, although he also threw 5 interceptions, with 4 coming in the third quarter alone. San Diego turned the ball over 7 times in total, but Oakland couldn't capitalize on the miscues. The Detroit Lions and San Francisco 49ers tied for the league's worst record last year, finishing 2-14, but both teams have already equaled those win totals, jumping out to 2-0 starts. Week 3 in the NFL saw an explosion of scoring, with the Los Angeles Rams leading the way. The Rams scored 44 first-half points in a 51-21 win against Green Bay. The Packers threw 5 interceptions, 2 of which were turned into touchdowns with returns of 99 and 83 yards. New England beat Seattle 37-31 in a passing duel between Steve Grogan and Jim Zorn. Grogan passed for 271 yards and 3 touchdowns, and Zorn threw for 312 yards and 4 touchdowns in the losing effort. New York Jets quarterback Richard Todd threw for an NFL record 42 completions in a 37-27 loss to the 49ers to top George Blanda's 37 completions in 1964. Todd completed passes to 10 different receivers, but his favorite target was running back Clark Gaines, who had 17 receptions. All 3 of Todd's touchdowns came in the fourth quarter after the 49ers had taken a 30-6 lead. San Francisco backup quarterback Joe Montana made the most of his limited playing time, with half of his 4 completions going for touchdowns, both to receiver Dwight Clark. Montana also ran for a touchdown. Last year's Heisman Trophy winner Charles White, who was quiet in the first 2 games, had 159 yards in total offense and 2 scores to lead the Cleveland Browns over the Kansas City Chiefs 20-13. In Week 4, Seattle pitched the first shutout of the season with a 14-0 win over Washington. It wasn't a pretty game, with quarterbacks Jim Zorn and Joe Theismann a combined 23 of 54 with no touchdowns and 6 interceptions. There were also 22 penalties called in the game. In Pittsburgh, quarterback Cliff Stout made his NFL debut relieving Terry Bradshaw in the Steelers' blowout 38-3 win against Chicago. Stout isn't new to the team, though. He's been Bradshaw's backup for the last 3 years, but had never been called upon. He acquitted himself well in his first outing, completing 5 of 8 passes for 70 yards and a touchdown. Lions rookie sensation and NFL leading rusher Billy Sims also kept his hot start going with 157 yards and another blowout win for Detroit, 27-7 over the Vikings. Danny White seems to be getting more comfortable as Dallas stayed unbeaten, winning in Green Bay 28-7. White was an efficient 16 for 20 through the air with 2 touchdowns and added 57 yards rushing, with 50 of that coming on a fake punt. Baltimore has won 2 games this season, and both are against the winless Jets. Quarterback Burt Jones was 18 of 25 for 275 yards and 3 touchdowns. San Diego stayed undefeated as Dan Fouts connected with tight end Kellen Winslow for 2 touchdowns in a win over Kansas City. The Chiefs, under third-year head coach Marv Levy, have yet to register a win this year. The 1980 college football season began with the Alabama Crimson Tide attempting to be the first team to win 3 AP national championships in a row. Since 1947, 7 teams have had the chance to accomplish the feat, and all had failed. Challengers to Alabama for the title include Georgia and Tennessee in the SEC, Independence, Pitt, and Penn State in the East, Ohio State, Michigan, and Purdue in the Big Ten, Oklahoma and Nebraska in the Big 8, Houston, Arkansas, and Texas in the Southwest Conference, Southern Cal, Washington, and Stanford in the Pac-10, BYU and Utah in the WAC, North Carolina in the ACC, and Notre Dame and Florida State among the other independent teams. Other conference favorites include Toledo in the MAC, San Jose State in the Pacific Coast Conference, McNeese State in the Southland, Tulsa in the Missouri Valley, Tennessee Chattanooga in the Southern, and Yale in the Ivy League. Pittsburgh, the national champions 4 years ago, have been picked by Sports Illustrated to be this year's champion. Head coach Jackie Sherrill has led the Panthers to a 28-7-1 record in his 3 years at the school after taking over for Johnny Majors, who left for Tennessee after winning the title in 1976. Pitt is led this year by 3-time All-American defensive end Hugh Green and sophomore quarterback Dan Marino. The college football season kicked off with a Monday night game between the 10th-ranked Texas Longhorns and number 6 Arkansas Razorbacks. ABC paid each team about $250,000 to move the game up to the start of the season from mid-October. Texas came into the game as a 1-point favorite and had not lost to the Razorbacks at home since 1966, but it was Arkansas that got out to a 7-0 lead in the second quarter. Texas went on a 17-point run of their own before halftime and never relinquished the lead, holding on for a 23-17 win. In the first full Saturday of college football, the only game between ranked teams was number 9 Purdue going on the road to take on number 11 Notre Dame. Mark Herman, Purdue's quarterback and Heisman candidate, was unable to play because of an injury in practice, and Notre Dame rolled to a 31-10 victory. Number 2 Alabama extended the nation's longest major college football winning streak to 22 games, cruising to a 26-3 victory over Georgia Tech. Number 13 Florida State took advantage of 4 LSU turnovers to shut out the Tigers in Baton Rouge 16-0. Sophomore John Elway threw for 250 yards and 2 touchdowns to lead number 15 Stanford to a 35-25 road win against the Oregon Ducks. Number 16 Georgia started the season on the road facing Tennessee in front of a record crowd of 95,288. The Volunteers got out to a 9-0 halftime lead, and after adding a touchdown in the third quarter, attempted a 2-point conversion that failed. In the final 4 minutes of the fourth quarter, the Bulldogs began to rally, recovering a fumbled punt for a safety. On the ensuing drive, highly touted freshman Herschel Walker ran over several Volunteers on the way to a 16-yard touchdown. Georgia scored on another Walker touchdown in the fourth quarter, and Rex Robinson kicked the extra point to stretch his SEC record of consecutive extra points to 67 and gave the Bulldogs a 1-point lead, which would be enough to win the game. In other games outside of the top 20, West Virginia played their first game in a new $22 million stadium with a record home attendance of over 50,000. Oliver Luck threw 2 touchdowns and led West Virginia past Cincinnati 41-27. BYU, who was unranked in the AP poll but number 19 in the coaches poll, lost at New Mexico 25-21. The Lobos scored the final 12 points of the game on 4 field goals. Jim Kelly threw 2 second-half touchdowns as the Miami Hurricanes blew past Louisville 24-10. George Rogers, the nation's second leading rusher last year, had touchdown runs of 45 and 72 yards to lead South Carolina to a 37-0 rout of Pacific. And finally, there were celebrations in St. Paul, Minnesota, when Division III Macalester ended the longest losing streak in NCAA history with a 17-14 triumph over Mount Scenario College. The losing streak that began in 1974 and reached 50 games was finally ended with a little luck. Down 14-0 late in the third quarter, the Scots recovered a fumble and converted it into a touchdown. In the fourth quarter, on 4th and goal, Macalester scored on an end run. With less than a minute to go and the Scots driving, a pass was deflected twice but ended up as a Scots catch at the 5-yard line. Freshman kicker Bob Kay kicked a 23-yard field goal with 11 seconds left to seal the victory and sent the 3,000 fans at Macalester Stadium into a frenzy. The second week of the college football season did not feature any matchups between ranked teams, but was not without drama for many top 20 teams. Number 1 Ohio State was a 4-touchdown favorite over Syracuse, but needed a furious comeback from a 21-3 deficit to win 31-21. The heavily favored and third-ranked Pittsburgh Panthers survived 9 turnovers to beat Boston College 14-6 on a pair of touchdown passes from Dan Marino to Benny Pryor. Number 4 Oklahoma was down 7-0 to Kentucky at halftime, but scored 29 second-half points behind their wishbone attack to take the win. Number 5 Southern California got an interception by cornerback Jeff Fisher in Tennessee territory to set up a winning field goal as time ran out to beat the Volunteers in Knoxville 20-17. 11th ranked Michigan was tied with Northwestern 10-10 in the fourth quarter, but a second touchdown pass to wide receiver Anthony Carter sealed a 17-10 win for the Wolverines at Michigan Stadium in front of over 100,000 fans. Number 13 Stanford got a touchdown from John Elway to Ken Marjoram with 38 seconds remaining to lift the Cardinal to a 19-14 victory over Tulane. Marjoram is now the Pac-10 leader in touchdown receptions with 24. With the game tied at 3 apiece, number 15 North Carolina got a 58-yard touchdown run in the fourth quarter to take a 9-3 lead over Texas Tech in Lubbock. The Red Raiders drove the ball to the Tar Heels' 2-yard line, but linebacker Lawrence Taylor forced a fumble and fell on the ball to preserve the victory. Number 18 Auburn got a first-half field goal from Al Del Greco and a second-half touchdown to hold off the TCU Horned Frogs 10-7 in Fort Worth. Quarterback Mark Herman was back for 20th-ranked Purdue and threw for 347 yards to set up 4 field goals in a 12-6 victory over Wisconsin in Madison. In Tempe, Arizona State stunned number 9 Houston, winning the turnover battle 9-3 and winning the game 29-13. The Florida Gators have already eclipsed their win total from last year, beating California 41-13. The big matchups of Week 3 in college football featured number 8 Notre Dame hosting number 14 Michigan, and number 4 Southern Cal hosting number 20 South Carolina. In South Bend, the game was a close affair into the fourth quarter. Notre Dame took a 26-21 lead with 3 minutes remaining, but the Wolverines drove down the field behind the running of Butch Woolfolk and scored on a 1-yard touchdown pass with 41 seconds left to take the lead. Notre Dame wasn't done though and kicked a 51-yard field goal in the last play of the game to win 29-27. The Southern Cal and South Carolina game was expected to be a duel between running backs Marcus Allen and George Rogers. Rogers outrushed Allen 141-107, but it was the Trojans who won the game 23-13. The 7th-ranked Texas Longhorns were down at home to Utah State 17-7, but scored 28 unanswered points in the second half to win 35-17. Number 10 Georgia somehow beat Clemson 20-16. The Bulldogs failed to gain a first down the entire first half and were outgained by the Tigers 239-33. But a punt return for a touchdown and a 98-yard interception return helped Georgia eke out the 4-point win at home. Boston College upset 11th-ranked Stanford 30-13 at home in dominating fashion. The 18th-ranked Houston Cougars suffered their second upset in a row, losing to the Miami Hurricanes 14-7. Preseason number 9 Purdue dropped its second game of the season, losing to UCLA 23-14, and number 1 ranked Alabama beat Mississippi 59-35 to win their 23rd straight. Number 5 Pittsburgh beat Kansas 18-3 in a less than perfect game with 45-mile-an-hour wind gusts in Lawrence, Kansas. Number 2 Ohio State, number 6 Nebraska, number 9 Florida State, number 15 Missouri, and number 16 Washington all won in blowouts. In Week 4, chaos ruled as 8 ranked teams lost. Matchups between ranked teams included number 2 Ohio State hosting number 20 Arizona State, number 3 Nebraska at number 11 Penn State, and number 14 North Carolina welcoming number 19 Maryland. Those games were all won by the favorites comfortably. But the other 5 top 20 teams that lost this week were all upsets. They included number 4 Oklahoma getting routed by Stanford 31-14. Cardinal quarterback John Elway was efficient in the win, guiding Stanford to a 31-0 lead before 2 late touchdowns by the Sooners. Number 9 Florida State lost to the Miami Hurricanes 10-9, failing to score on a 2-point conversion attempt in the last minute of the game. Number 13 Washington lost at home to Oregon 34-10. The Huskies' offense, which was averaging 500 yards a game, was held in check by the Ducks. Number 17 Michigan lost at home to South Carolina 17-14, giving up the lead as the Gamecocks scored 2 second-half touchdowns, including one by All-American running back George Rogers. Number 18 Auburn was crushed by Tennessee 42-0 at home in front of 75,000 disappointed fans. After the first month of games, there were still 14 undefeated teams in the top 20, including each of the top 11 teams. With conference play heating up in October, there will doubtlessly be many shakeups to come. On August 11th, Reggie Jackson of the New York Yankees became the 19th player in Major League Baseball history to hit 400 home runs. There was an incentive for the fan who caught the ball to return it to Jackson. Panasonic, whose products Jackson endorses, had offered an $800 television set in exchange for the ball. 10-year-old Cheryl Hanchar dove into an empty block of left field seats and out-scrambled a half a dozen competitors to retrieve the ball. In addition to the 24-inch color TV, Hanchar also received front row seats to another game. George Brett of the Kansas City Royals extended a hitting streak to 30 games and raised his average to .404 in August. Although his streak would end at 30 games, he would keep his average over 400 until September 19th. He is now batting .387, and with only 5 games left, will need to get hits in 13 of his next 18 at-bats to get his average back to 400 in an attempt to be the first player to hit 400 for a season since Ted Williams in 1941. Montreal Expos pitcher Bill Gullickson struck out 18 batters in a 4-2 victory over the Chicago Cubs on September 11th. It was a major league record for most strikeouts by a rookie, and only one shy of the overall record. Steve Carlton, Tom Seaver, and Nolan Ryan are the only 3 pitchers in the 20th century to strike out 19 batters in a 9-inning game. Another rookie, Gary Ward of the Minnesota Twins, became the 6th player in franchise history to hit for the cycle. He also set a major league record for fewest games played before hitting for a cycle. It was only the 14th game of Ward's career. The San Diego Padres earned their paychecks in August playing 3 marathon games within 11 days. On August 15th, they played a 20-inning game lasting 6 hours and 17 minutes. 6 days later, they played a 17-inning game that lasted over 5 hours. 5 days after that came a 5-hour 18-inning game. Although the attendance at the end of those games may have been sparse, the attendance at the start of a game in New York was even more anemic. On September 30th, only 1,754 fans showed up for a game between the Mets and Pirates. Despite that lackluster showing, every team in the National League has reached the 1 million mark in attendance this season for the first time in history. With less than a week left in the Major League Baseball season, 3 division titles are still up for grabs. The Astros are leading the Dodgers by 2 games in the NL West, the Expos are up a half a game over the Phillies in the NL East, and the Yankees are 2.5 games ahead of the Orioles in the AL East. The AL West has been settled for some time, with the Kansas City Royals holding a 12.5 game lead over the Oakland Athletics. Jack Nicklaus won his 5th PGA championship in August to extend his record for major championships to 17. It was his second win in a major tournament this year after winning the U.S. Open in June with a record-setting total of 272. Nicklaus set another scoring record in the PGA Championship, this time by winning the tournament with a 7-stroke margin. Five-time All-Star Pete Maravich has retired after 10 years in the NBA. Maravich led the league in scoring in 1977, averaging 31.1 points per game with the New Orleans Jazz. He holds the NBA records for free throws attempted in a quarter with 16 and free throws made in a quarter with 14. In addition to the Jazz, he has also played for the Atlanta Hawks and finished his career this year with the Boston Celtics. David Dixon, a former part owner of the New Orleans Saints, hopes to have a new professional football league ready by next spring. Franchises are planned in many of the current NFL cities so that existing stadiums could be used with games in the spring and summer. Dixon believes there's enough talent for a new league without getting into a bidding war with the NFL. The new league will be called the United States Football League, or USFL. And finally, the NFL is cracking down on its image. No, it's not hard-hitting or questionable calls. It's the socks. The commissioner's office imposed a total of $1,000 in fines to the Cincinnati Bengals for sagging socks. The NFL's director of personnel said the league is concerned about the image it conveys on television. That's all for August and September 1980. Looking ahead to the next episode, the Major League Baseball season concludes with results from the playoffs and World Series. The NFL season reaches the halfway mark. The college football season rolls on, and much more on the October 1980 edition of Back in Time Sports.